My sister tried to destroy my life, but I won and conquered my peace and my future. I never thought my life could change so drastically in a matter of weeks. My name is Marina. I'm 32 years old. I'm pregnant with my first child. And until recently, I thought I had everything under control. Working, married to my husband, Renato, we built our house with planning, saving every penny my parents set aside for my wedding. I've always been practical, down to earth, and I value stability and security. But my sense of control shattered when my younger sister, Paula, began accusing me of unfairness and selfishness. She spent her entire wedding fund on a lavish party without thinking about the future. And when the budget got tight, she decided it was my fault for not warning her about the importance of saving money. It was a shock. I'd always thought siblings shared love, not resentment and accusations. Receiving aggressive messages from her, especially while I was expecting my son, left me feeling devastated. I began to feel a mixture of fear, sadness, and anger I'd never experienced before. My thoughts swirled incessantly. Had I done something wrong? How could I deal with someone who should support me but instead wants to destroy my peace? The tension in my chest, my racing heart, and the accompanying insomnia told me that my life was about to enter a conflict I didn't know if I could endure, and I realized I needed to find the strength within myself to weather this storm. My relationship with Paula has always been complicated, but I never imagined it would reach this point. When we were teenagers, we shared laughs, secrets, and even borrowed clothes. But our choices were always different. I preferred to save, invest in the future, and maintain a simple life. She always sought ostentation, grand parties, and external recognition. When she got married, she spent the entire fund my parents had saved for her on an expensive party, thinking it would bring status. I never judged her. I just thought we were on different paths. The problem began when reality hit her, and she refused to take responsibility. She began blaming me, saying I was selfish, that I had a secret about the future, and that I should have warned her about the importance of saving money. Reading those words was like feeling knives in my chest. My body reacted with a cold sweat, a tight heart, and a feeling of helplessness. I tried to ignore it, taking deep breaths and repeating that I couldn't. Let myself get carried away, but the messages continued, increasingly aggressive. She began to insinuate that she had a right to part of my house, as if my planned life were at her disposal for frustration. Anger and sadness mingled, and I felt a physical pressure on my chest, as if I were carrying the weight of the world. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or simply hide in my room to avoid facing the reality unfolding before me. The day everything intensified was when I announced my pregnancy. I was radiant, trembling with emotion just telling my parents and Renato. My father, always serious, let a few tears escape. My mother cried, hugging me. But Paula, upon hearing, frowned. At first I thought it was fleeting jealousy, but then the messages came. Each word was a veiled accusation, saying I was only happy because I wanted to see her suffer, that I had no right to plan like this, and that she deserved part of what I had achieved. I read and reread it, feeling a lump in my throat and a tightness in my chest that left me breathless. I tried to talk to her, to explain my choices, but it was no use. She just repeated her accusations, ignoring all logic. The feeling of injustice left me exhausted and emotionally vulnerable. I would wake at night thinking about every word, every harsh sentence she said, and I felt my body react, my stomach churning, my heart racing, and an anguish that seemed endless. Renato tried to calm me down, telling me I didn't need to give in, that it wasn't my fault, but the guilt crept in anyway. It was an invisible, internal conflict between my reason and my feelings, while my sister seemed determined to turn my every achievement into a source of pain. The situation began to affect my routine. I found it difficult to concentrate at work. I became socially isolated, and even simple things like choosing furniture for the baby's room became an emotional burden. Every call from Paula felt like an attack. She mixed frustration with accusation, and I, pregnant, felt that any nervousness could affect my baby. My body reacted with constant tension, stiff neck, cold hands, insomnia, and even lack of appetite. I spent days reliving childhood moments, trying to understand when our relationship had become so toxic. Memories of games, confidences, and laughter now contrasted with the present hostility. I constantly asked myself, is it worth fighting or simply giving in to avoid more pain? The idea of telling my parents everything terrified me because I knew it could push Paula toward a definitive breakup. I felt emotionally isolated, caught in a limbo between protecting my family and not losing my sister to pride and resentment. Every decision seemed fraught with irreversible consequences. It was at this point that I realized I needed to act. I couldn't continue to let myself be consumed by Paula's resentment, nor could I allow my husband, my baby, and myself to be harmed. My first reaction was to seek emotional support. Outside my family, talk to friends and write down my feelings. Writing helped me organize my thoughts and understand that I wasn't responsible for her mistakes. Gradually, I realized that setting clear boundaries was essential. I began to respond firmly, explaining that there was no manipulation, that my choices were the result of planning, and that respect should exist even in conflict situations. The most important change, however, happened within me. I decided that I wouldn't allow my sister's anger to contaminate my happiness. I felt my body gradually relax, my anxiety subside, and a sense of control over my life return. It was the beginning of reconstruction, where I understood that my peace didn't depend on her approval, but on clarity in my own values and actions. When I started setting boundaries, I realized it wouldn't be easy. Paula didn't take kindly to any sign of firmness. Every message I sent her, clear and direct, was met with anger, accusations, and attempts to guilt-trip me. It was painful to realize that despite all my efforts to maintain a dialogue, she didn't really want to talk. My heart sank, my breath shallowed, and I felt a constant lump in my throat. Renato, my husband, remained firmly by my side, reminding me that I couldn't give in to her manipulations. I began making small, practical changes, turning off notifications, not reading messages while I was home alone, creating a safe space for my pregnancy. Each step seemed small, but for me, it was like rebuilding internal walls that had crumbled under the daily attacks. The physical sensation of tension began to gradually subside, and I realized my body needed this emotional protection. I still felt anger, of course, but also a newfound determination, not to allow my sister's hostility to rob me of moments of happiness. In the midst of all this, I realized how the entire family was being affected. My parents began to notice the emotional toll on me, even without me directly mentioning Paula. My mother, Helena, always practical and realistic, began to counsel me without judging me. My father, Ottavio, tried to mediate, but I saw in him the effort to protect not only my peace, but also the family balance. It was impossible to ignore the tension when we were all together, but at the same time, I felt my determination was bearing fruit. I began to realize that true change needed to begin within myself, with my choices, my limits, and my ability to say no when something went beyond my respect. Each conversation with my parents reinforced my conviction that my financial planning, my choices, and my future were valid, and that I didn't need to apologize for them. The hardest part was dealing with the moments of guilt that arose. Although I rationally knew I wasn't responsible for Paula's choices, emotionally, I still felt like I could have done something to prevent her suffering. The sensation was physical: tightness in my chest, extreme fatigue, and sleepless nights. It was at this point that I began writing daily, venting about each message, each feeling of injustice, each fear. Writing became therapy, a safe space where I could feel my emotions without being judged. I realized that recording everything helped me organize my thoughts, understand patterns, and realize that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't control another person's reaction. This awareness began to give me strength. Meanwhile, Renato remained my anchor. He reminded me that we were building something solid together and that my happiness shouldn't depend on Paula's approval. His words calmed me, but also motivated me to act firmly. I began to set clear boundaries, objective answers, face-to-face conversations only when necessary, and real protection over my personal and financial life. Each small step felt like a victory, but at the same time, it brought with it the fear that Paula would react even more aggressively. My body reacted with tension, but my mind was strengthening. I began to realize that building my peace required emotional discipline, the courage to confront reality, and the acceptance that some relationships can remain distant until the other party matures and takes responsibility. It was during this period that an internal shift began to emerge. I noticed my anxiety diminishing, my thoughts clearing, and that my physical and emotional health needed to be a priority. I could feel my heart beating slower, my cold sweats lessening, and my chest tightening. I began to imagine my son growing up in a safe environment, surrounded by love and respect, without the weight of daily accusations. Each day of determination and emotional discipline was like building bricks to rebuild my well-being. I understood that this journey wasn't about beating Paula, but about reconnecting with myself, my values, and my ability to make decisions that protected my happiness and that of my family. This recognition gave me the strength to continue, even when tension returned, even when anger persisted. I was learning that overcoming adversity begins when you decide not to be held hostage by others' hostility, and that it is possible to create space for peace, even within the chaos of family life. Over time, I began to realize I wasn't alone in this battle. My parents, though they tried not to take sides, began to understand that Paula was exaggerating her accusations and that my firm stance wasn't selfishness, but protection. My mother, Helena, ever practical, told me that I couldn't bear the responsibility for my sister's mistakes and that for my own good and the baby's, I needed to set clear boundaries. My father, Ottavio, watched silently, but I noticed him beginning to intervene discreetly, reinforcing that my decisions were correct. Feeling this support gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt in months. Every hug from my mother, every word of encouragement from my father, made my body relax, lessened the pressure in my chest, and brought a sense of relief I hadn't felt since before the crisis began. It was at that moment that I understood that overcoming this didn't depend on changing Paula, but on protecting myself, rebuilding my self-esteem, and trusting the people who truly cared about my well-being. Even with this support, there were days when Paula's anger returned with a vengeance. Every unexpected call, every message insinuating injustice, made my heart race and my hands tremble. Anxiety seemed to creep up my spine, and I needed to find ways to stay calm. I began taking morning walks alone, breathing deeply, and writing down every feeling that arose before it overwhelmed me. I wrote about the fear, the frustration, the pain of realizing my sister wouldn't accept responsibility. Each word on paper was like a weight lifted from my shoulders. Gradually, I realized that this process of daily venting not only helped organize my thoughts, but also strengthened my mind. I was able to look at Paula and her accusations with less fear and more clarity. I was beginning to realize that overcoming grief isn't about ignoring the problem, but about learning to react healthily, protecting your peace and setting boundaries without feeling guilty. During this time, my body also began to feel the effects of prolonged stress. The pregnancy required care, and I sensed that anxiety and stress could affect the baby. I began to connect more deeply with my pregnancy, feeling every kick, every movement, and remembering that I needed to be strong not only for myself, but for him. Renato became my closest partner, helping with daily tasks, shopping, and preparing the nursery. Feeling his constant presence was comforting. His every gesture reminded me that my family would not be limited to my relationship with Paula, that there were other, stronger, more secure bonds to nurture. I realized I needed to invest my energy in building positive moments, planning for the future, and allowing my sister's hostility to have as little space as possible in my life. Little by little, I began to act more assertively. When Paula sent messages or made accusations, I responded objectively, without giving in to the emotional onslaught. It wasn't easy. My body still reacted with anxiety, but my mind was firmer. I began to realize that protecting my boundaries was a way of caring for my baby, my marriage, and my own mental health. It wasn't about rejecting Paula, but about showing that my life, my choices, and my well-being were a priority. I learned that overcoming challenges requires emotional discipline and the courage to face those who try to manipulate you, without losing your integrity or harboring unnecessary resentment. Each small victory, each day I didn't give in to provocation, was a concrete demonstration that I could regain control of my life. And then, something shifted. Subtle, but noticeable. Paula remained frustrated, but my clear boundaries began to create a barrier she couldn't overcome. I could feel my body relax more during the day, sleep better at night, and even smile again when I thought about the future. The constant feeling of fear began to subside, replaced by a calm determination. I didn't need her approval to be happy, and my planning and achievements weren't justification for attacks. Overcoming obstacles began to emerge in small daily gestures, in the feeling of peace returning to my body, and in the confidence that I was protecting my family and my baby from the emotional toll of unfair conflicts. For the first time in months, I felt like my life was back in my hands, and that I could face the future with hope, even as Paula continued to deal with her own frustrations. It was at this moment that I began to realize how much my emotional growth was linked to my ability to let go of the need to please everyone. Before, I felt I needed to maintain the peace at all costs, but I learned that giving in to Paula's emotional manipulation only left me vulnerable. I began to develop strategies to deal with her in a healthy way, responding only when necessary, not fueling arguments via text messages, and avoiding comments about my personal life that could be used against me. Feeling my body less tense and my breathing calmer was a clear sign that I was on the right path. Renato observed my change and supported me, and each gesture of affection reminded me that, even in the midst of conflict, I had people by my side I could completely trust. At the same time, I began to realize that overcoming adversity isn't about beating someone, but about rebuilding your own space, your own peace, and your self-esteem, even if that means certain relationships remain distant or with clear boundaries. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents strengthened. Helena and Ottavio began to listen to me more attentively and support me both practically and emotionally. They helped me get my priorities in order, reinforcing that my happiness, safety, and my baby's health were more important than any unnecessary conflict. This realization brought enormous physical and emotional relief. My body felt less tense, my stomach less upset, and my mind clearer. I began to realize that I didn't need to carry the weight of responsibility for Paula's mistakes, nor did I allow her frustration to contaminate my life. Each conversation with my parents strengthened me, reminding me that I wasn't alone and that there were people who valued my efforts and determination. This support became essential to my emotional rebuilding, as it gave me the confidence to act according to my values, without fear of judgment or manipulation. At the same time, I began investing more in my own life, my home, my pregnancy, and my career. I felt like every small step forward was a victory. Preparing the baby's room, carefully choosing furniture and objects, and planning our finances, everything became a ritual of empowerment. Each decision reminded me that I was capable, that my choices had value, and that respecting myself should come before any attempts at external manipulation. I felt my body relax more each day, my sleep improve, and my heart fill with hope for the future. I was learning that overcoming challenges is a daily process, made up of small actions, emotional discipline, and consciously protecting one's own peace. Gradually, I noticed subtle changes in Paula as well. Although she still expressed frustration, the clear boundaries I established created a healthy barrier. I no longer felt struck by every attack, and my emotional peace became a priority. My body felt lighter, with less muscle tension, less tightness in my chest, and fewer cold sweats. My mind was clearer, less reactive, and more focused on building my life, my future, and my baby's well-being. I began to realize that overcoming pain isn't about erasing pain, but about learning to cope with it in a healthy way, creating space for happiness, and not allowing someone else's anger or blame to determine the course of your life. It was then that I finally felt a sense of profound relief. The constant anxiety began to subside. My thoughts became more organized, and my heart began to beat calmly again. I realized I had built an emotional barrier that protected me, without having to cut ties completely, but by establishing clear boundaries. The physical sensation of tension gradually faded, and my mind focused on planning, happiness, and peace. I began to believe that, despite all the challenges, I could bounce back. My pregnancy became a period of internal growth, an opportunity to learn how to deal with family conflicts in a healthy and assertive way, and to recognize that protecting one's own peace is an act of love, both for myself and for my son. I felt, for the first time in months, that life could be lived with ease, even amidst complicated relationships. In the following days, I felt I was finally regaining my emotional space. Each breath became deeper, each step firmer. I could look at Paula without that knot in my chest, realizing that the problem wasn't mine, but hers, the choices she made, and her inability to take responsibility. I began to feel proud of myself, of my firm stance, and of the care I was dedicating to my pregnancy. I realized that overcoming adversity doesn't happen overnight. It's built gradually, with emotional discipline, clear boundaries, and a focus on what truly matters. My thoughts, previously disorganized, began to align, and my body, previously tense, relaxed. I felt my heart beat more lightly, and the constant feeling of fear and guilt began to fade. Every victory, no matter how small, was a step toward a healthier life, a more secure future for me and my son, and the ability to deal with family conflicts without losing my peace. At the same time, I realized how much my relationship with Renato had strengthened. He became my safe haven, my anchor. Every gesture from him, from small, daily help to words of encouragement, reinforced my conviction that I wasn't alone and that I could face any challenge. Together, we planned every detail of the house, the baby's room, and our finances, reinforcing the sense of control and security I had lost in the previous months. His presence gave me the courage to face Paula head-on, without fear of emotional retaliation, and constantly reminded me that my happiness and well-being were a priority. Feeling this real and constant partnership taught me that overcoming family conflicts isn't a solitary task. Support and understanding from those by your side are essential to rebuilding trust and inner peace. The process of overcoming grief also taught me to manage my own emotions more maturely. I realized that feeling anger, sadness, and frustration is natural, but that it's important to transform them into strength, not submission to suffering. I began meditating, walking, and writing about my feelings daily, creating a safe space to understand each reaction and each thought. This routine helped me realize that I didn't need to give in to external manipulations to maintain peace, that my happiness shouldn't depend on someone else's approval or frustration. My body responded to these practices: calmer nights, a slower heartbeat, and less physical tension. Each conscious gesture became a building block in the construction of my emotional stability, which was now more solid and resilient than ever. Finally, I realized that overcoming didn't just mean dealing with Paula, but learning to care for myself and my future. I could feel every movement of my baby, every growth of my pregnancy, and this connected me deeply with the life I was building. The fear and anxiety that had previously paralyzed me now transformed into motivation to maintain my boundaries and protect my peace. My body felt lighter, my mind clearer, and my heart more serene. I knew that, even if Paula remained frustrated or resistant to responsibility, my life and well-being didn't need to be held hostage by this situation. The feeling of emotional freedom was unique and revitalizing. Today, I can look back on this entire period and realize that, despite the pain, anger, and fear, it was possible to bounce back. I learned that overcoming difficulties depends on establishing clear boundaries, protecting your peace, investing in those who support you, and taking care of yourself, even amid intense family conflicts. I still feel lingering feelings of hurt, but I don't allow them to dominate my life. My pregnancy has become a symbol of renewal, strength, and the ability to transform adversity into growth. I know that despite the difficulties, my family and I can move forward with balance, confidence, and love, and that my happiness depends on my choice to protect my emotional space and believe in myself. Today, I am stronger, more confident, and more determined to live a full life, with boundaries, courage, and peace.